Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. A very warm welcome to new patrons Harpy Shopper and David Green. And of course, welcome all patrons who are at the least getting this podcast a few days earlier than non-patrons. But in case you weren't aware, as a patron, you can also get access to our entire back catalogue of seasons. I think we're up to about 20 full seasons now available as chaptered files for download. So if you'd like to know more, just pop along to patreon.com/The History Network. That's Patreon, patreon.com/The History Network. Thank you again so much. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 28, Episode 4, The Ubiquity of the Cretan Archer in Ancient Warfare. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray Darm is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand, living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Combat 40, Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior. Alexander confronts the Achaemenids, 334 to 331 BC, from Osprey Publishing. He is a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. When a contingent of archers is mentioned in the context of Greek and Roman armies, more often than not the culture associated with them is that of Crete. Indeed, when we just have archers mentioned in an army without a specific origin, Cretan archers are commonly assumed to be meant. So ubiquitous with archery and groups of mercenary archers were the Cretans. The Cretans are the most famous, but certainly not the only nation associated with a particular fighting style. Rhodian slingers and Thracian peltasts leap to mind, but there are others too. The long history of Cretan archers can be seen in the sources, according to some stretching from the First Messenian War right down to the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Even in the reliable historical record, we find Cretan arch units from the Peloponnesian War well into the Roman period. Crete had had a long association with archery. Several linear B tablets from Knossos refer to arrow counts, 6,010 on one and 2,630 on another, as well as archers being depicted on seals and mosaics. Diodorus Siculus recounts the story of Apollo that, as the discoverer of the bow, he taught the people of the land all about the use of the bow, this being the reason why the art of archery is especially cultivated by the Cretans, and the bow is called Cretan. Pausanias reports his surprise at seeing a bronze statue of Diotrophes, which was pierced by arrows, because the only Greeks whose custom it is to use that weapon are the Cretans. Diotrophes was associated with the Thracian mercenaries who arrived too late to go on Demosthenes' expedition against Syracuse in the Peloponnesian War in 413 BCE. This statue may of course prove that archery was indeed practised elsewhere in Greece, although Pausanias makes the point that other states who had practised archery gave it up to become heavy infantry, the Locrians and the Marlians. Only Crete continued to be associated with the bow, an unquestioned fact even down to the time of Pausanias. The first reliable references to Cretan archers as a unit, however, which fit with our ideas about developments in ancient warfare, seem to come from the context of the Peloponnesian War 431 to 404 BCE. There are references to them appearing earlier, but these hardly seem credible. Ctesias of Cnidus, as summarised by Photius, mentions Cretan archers at the Battle of Salamis in 480. This explicitly contradicts Herodotus, who tells us that the Cretans did not send support. Archers are mentioned at Citylea by Aeschylus, and Plato has Cleinias of Crete say that the Cretans affirm that Salamis saved Greece, which might suggest a belief that they were involved. There were also archers at Plataea, although where they came from is not mentioned. Cretans are a possibility if we reject Herodotus's statement that they did not contribute to the cause. It is, of course, dangerous to assume that when archers are mentioned, and with no more to go on, that they must have been Cretans, although, as we shall see, this assumption is one our sources commonly share. It also seems unlikely that the use of mercenary troops, like Cretan archer contingents, were popular before the last third of the 5th century BCE during the Peloponnesian War. It is, however, not so easy to dismiss an early date for the Cretan archer. Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus provides a record of the Cretan Doge, which refers to the military education of Cretan youth and men messing together, something Lycurgus would copy from Crete and later model at Sparta. Problems with the semi-mythical Lycurgus, whose dates range from the 12th century BCE down to the 7th, mean that there is very little solid we can make of this Cretan Doge. It would, however, seem to predate the Spartan system whenever it occurred. According to Strabo, this Cretan system of messes, or andria, were to promote courage and avoid cowardice, and that from boyhood they should grow up accustomed to arms and toils, so as to scorn heat, cold, marches over rugged and steep roads, and blows received in gymnasiums or regular battles, and that they should practice not only archery, but also the war dance. It is clear from Strabo, therefore, that this Cretan constitution was tied to the idea of training Cretan youths as archers. Likewise, in Plato's Laws, set on Crete, with a discussion about the laws needed for the foundation of a Cretan colony, the association of Crete with archery is reiterated early in the dialogue. Under these circumstances, the rugged terrain of Crete, we are obliged to have light armour for running and to avoid any heavy equipment, so bows and arrows were adopted as suitable because of their lightness. The conversation in Laws mentions archery as part of the education of youth, although the dialogue is usually taken to have a wider context than just a Cretan one. There is also evidence in the references to the Pyrrhic War dance that they may have also trained in other combat techniques, but that these two were tied to archery. Plato also suggests training in riding, javelin and slinging. Later in the dialogue, Plato's Athenian stranger says that gymnasia should be built for riding and archery, and that all youth should be trained in warfare and music. Polybius discussed the study of music at Crete for its military applications. Later still in Plato's Laws, competitions for peltasts in archery, shields, javelins and slinging are prescribed, and although horses are considered unnecessary in country as rugged as Crete, for a Cretan there is credit in being a mounted archer of javelin man. There seems to be enough in Plato from the middle of the 4th century and Strabo, writing in the 1st century CE, but probably using Ephorus, who wrote shortly after Plato, that the Cretans were, by then at least, synonymous with archery. Indeed, Plato's Laws may have begun an interest in Crete in the 4th century BCE, an interest sparked perhaps in part by the ubiquity of its archers in armies of the time. There are other sources on this institution in Crete making it more credible. Athenaeus has excerpts concerning it from both the Cretan history of Dosidas and the Cretan customs of Pergion. Strabo also adds that when the Cretan cities were devastated, they neglected military affairs, but some of the institutions continued in use among the Lyctians, Gortinians, and certain smaller cities. Lictus or Litus and Gortina are certainly named among others as sources for groups of mercenary archers. Polybius even states, on the occasion of the destruction of the city in 220 BCE, that Litus was Crete's most ancient city and the breeding place of her bravest men. Pausanias mentions Cretan archers during both the First and Second Messenian War in the middle of the 8th and early 7th centuries BCE. Pausanias' source for his book on Messenia was actually the Cretan poet Rhianus of Bean and the otherwise unknown Myron of Priene. Rhianus wrote in the 3rd century BCE, when Cretan archers were involved in virtually every battle, so that may cast doubt on his versions of events, especially having groups of Cretan mercenary archers involved in warfare so early. Pausanias is the only source for an unnamed battle during the First Messenian War where, against the Messenian light-armed troops, the Lacedaemonians employed Cretan archers as mercenaries. Then it is explicitly stated that the archers did not engage. 5 years later, when the Lacedaemonians marched against Ithome, the account in Pausanias goes to the trouble of stating that the Cretans were no longer with them. There is one further part of Pausanias' account which features Cretan archers who had been summoned as mercenaries from Lyctus and other cities, and were patrolling Messenia. The passage involves the archers capturing Aristomenes and then being outwitted by a farm girl who freed Aristomenes. Doubt has been cast on these accounts, and it is possible they have been influenced by a later period when mercenary groups of Cretan archers were easily hired. And we will leave the ubiquity of Cretan archers there for now. Thanks, Murray, for the script, and we will continue with it in a couple of weeks' time. Just to remind you all, if you have not become a patron yet and you'd like to have a look at the benefits of becoming one, then please do pop along to Patreon, patreon.com/The History Network and find out about our Patreon account there. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.